Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, and I am in Austin, Texas, underground at the Brave New Books bookstore, hanging out with John Bush, a good friend of mine, activist, agorist, inspiration to me. And I'm excited to bring this to you guys. I've been pumping you up for the past weeks, telling you that I was going to be talking to John soon, and I really want to talk to him not only about what he's doing in the world of Bitcoin and really just being a pioneer to help spread that out there, but also the idea of freedom cells that he's been talking about the past months or so, and something that has really inspired me to apply it to the Houston area and beyond. So we're going to get into all of that today with you guys. So first off, let's talk with John. First, let me tell you a little bit about John Bush here. Let me tell you about this guy. So John is one of the first people that inspired me to start looking into solutions outside of the government, outside of politics. In 2011, when I first connected to the Houston and the Fed group, I stepped in and they asked me to be the facilitator, introducer of all the speakers. And John and Kat were coming down to Houston to speak, and John gave a talk about how to end the Federal Reserve. How do you end the Federal Reserve? You stop using it. And this is really before Bitcoin took off and everything that we have now, 4 years later. A lot more options to use alternative currencies and to create barter networks and all these great ideas. So it was really mind-blowing to me at the time, and I've spoke to other people who've seen those videos and looked back. I'm like, wow, this is some on-point stuff here. And in general, John has been just an inspiration to me over the years, and it's great to work with somebody that you're inspired by and all these different manners. So, hey, John, before we get into the freedom cells and everything, I want you to, give the audience a little bit of introduction about your background and how you got into activism and then how you got to Bitcoin.
Well, I first started questioning things more heavily after being exposed to a documentary on cable access here in Austin called 9/11 Road to Tyranny by one Alex Jones. And I guess that was in 2002, shortly after 9/11 happened. And I was a bit of a rebel before then, getting in trouble at school and causing a ruckus, maybe a little vandalism. But now I'm all about property rights these days. And that really just kind of opened my eyes to see that documentary and question what really happened on 9/11. And from there, started doing more research about global governance and the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Skull and Bones, all that good stuff. And then when I was going to college, I started learning about the Constitution and had a reverence for the Founding Fathers. Now I think they're like 1%ers that wanted to maintain their little position of privilege. But learned about the Constitution and the ideas that are in the Bill of Rights and thought that was exciting. Did some work with the ACLU on campus. We helped to start the Texas State ACLU chapter and some political activism. Got back into the 9/11 truth stuff. And then it was the Ron Paul campaign for president in 2008 that really got me introduced to libertarianism and got me even more motivated and active, because now I saw something that kind of made sense to me as an alternative to the status quo that I'd been researching and pushing back on before. And shortly after Ron Paul's campaign, which some would call a failure, I would call it a success, because a lot of people were drawn out of the woodwork and organized after that. We started Texans for Accountable Government Political Action Committee, which is about to celebrate its 7th year. And I helped to lead that organization for a couple years, and since then there's been a lot of great executive directors. But that started several years of heavy-handed political activism. And after that experience, while I think it was valuable and I learned a lot, made a lot of connections, and learned a lot about the inner workings of the political system, at the end of the day, I didn't feel much more free. And around this time, I met my lovely wife, Catherine Bleich, and she was kind of on the same journey, and she really inspired me to, if our goal is more freedom or a free society, the best way to achieve that goal, rather than asking other people to vote a certain way or change their behaviors, to take a hard look in the mirror and find where your life doesn't line up with the philosophy of liberty and try to change that, and to amplify and put an emphasis on those areas that do line up with the philosophy of liberty. So the consistent application of the philosophy of liberty in all of our lives is what will ultimately lead to a free society. And since then, been exploring agorism and Bitcoin, and now we're here at Brave New Books.
Sweet. Awesome. So I really, for one, I'm glad that you mentioned that point that you just said there, that, we have to look at the areas of our lives that where really I try to look at my life and see which way am I contributing to the problems that I am opposing, or that I'm trying to work against. And if you see yourself that you're talking about, oh, down with Monsanto or down with these corporations or down with the government, but then all day you're going and buying their products or you're using their products and you're feeding yourself, then you're working against yourself. So we have to reevaluate our lives. And again, like I said, those talks were really just an eye-opening moment for me to start recognizing, like, okay, we need to create as much community institutions as possible, give people an option, show them that there is an option outside of the government. What first got you to Bitcoin, though? How did you get introduced to Bitcoin?
I just heard about it in the periphery of the Liberty movement really early on and didn't really pay much attention to it. And then shortly thereafter, which was still way early, Kat started encouraging me to set up a wallet to mine Litecoin. And I was so busy at the time, I was like, oh no, we don't. Let me really look into this Bitcoin thing and this Litecoin and then let's give it a shot. But I want to understand it first. And of course, that didn't happen for like another year or so. So we missed out on a good opportunity there. But I think it was really at some conferences that I started the Liberty Forum in, I don't know if it was 2011 or 2010. I think it was 2011 in New Hampshire. That was an event that the Free State Project put on, and there was a whole crew of Bitcoiners, may have been 2012 actually, that were there, like Roger Ver, Eric Voorhees, and several others. And it was just kind of like the Bitcoin wrecking crew coming through. They were all successful and had done all sorts of cool entrepreneurial stuff with Bitcoin, and they were there exposing everyone. And that's where Jeffrey Tucker credits him turning into a Bitcoin fanatic. Before, he just thought it was a cool idea, innovative, cool market solution for money, but he was more of an Austrian economist and kind of had some reservations. And they took him out to lunch, and he became obsessed. So that was the opportunity. I was exposed. I sat down and interviewed the Bitcoin crew that was there, and just started thinking about it more and more then. And then I got into it as a means of activism, and because I'm an anarchist, and I saw that it's a working representation of anarchist philosophy applied in the real world on a global scale. That's pretty cool. And it wasn't until I actually started using Bitcoin, namely to pay Derrick Broze for writing for the Liberty Beat. Before, I was sending Western Union, which is a total pain in the ass, but I wanted to help Derrick in his quest for financial sovereignty. But I was paying 7% and having to drive to HEB, and I was like, wait a second, I'm all into Bitcoin. Why don't I just use Bitcoin to send to Derrick? So Derrick set up a wallet, and long story short, that using it was just so easy and seamless and amazing. And now that I actually had a sense of the true utility of Bitcoin, it really sucked me in, and I saw the value not only to help undermine the banks and government as a whole, but also the value to just make your life better and easier and cheaper.
Awesome. So then at some point you and Kat and your family started doing the unconventional tours, and you've done, I think, 3 now, traveling around the country and documenting, blogging the entire way, showing people how you can pay for your gas, you can pay for your hotel and get food using only Bitcoin. And like I said, I think this is really just a big pioneering action to take to show people that while we theorize about how Bitcoin could lead to more freedom, here's some people actually doing it and finding more ways and struggling and learning through it and making it easier for those who are coming afterwards. Yep. So walk us through what led to the decision to do that, and some lessons that you've learned from those trips.
Well, we always travel to go speak at conferences, PorcFest being one of them. This was actually the first year that we didn't make it. Kat in 7 years, me in 6. But PorcFest was coming up, and we were looking for ways that we could kind of educate and do some promotional stuff along the way. And before, something that we would do would seek sponsors, and people would help to fund our trip, and along the way we would promote their product or their organization. And so we were thinking, both of us were really into Bitcoin. It was actually 2013. I think it was 2013 New Year's. Catherine and I were brainstorming, and we were like totally broke, and we were thinking about what we can do to become more prosperous and also to further our activism and our interests. And we just thought like 2014 is going to be the year of Bitcoin for us. We're just going to go balls to the wall. We formulated the Sovereign BTC podcast. She came up with the BitMom all in one night, and we bought like a half a dozen URLs, only used a few of them. But one of them was unconventional. And we thought, we got these trips coming up. Maybe we should just try to do it all on Bitcoin. and we can reach out to sponsors that can help us along the way, and we can help promote their products. Like Airbit's wallet was absolutely phenomenal along the way because it has a business directory. So you pull into a new city, and you could search on the Airbit's wallet where some restaurants are that you can go eat. And yeah, so we figured, why the hell not? We're already going to be traveling. Why not try Bitcoin along the way? And we saw that there was a big need, and each trip got easier. There were new tools. The first one was up to New Hampshire and back using only Bitcoin in our minivan with our kids, and it was more difficult because there was a lack of tools and technology, and there were fewer restaurants to stop around and eat at. And then the second one, we drove out to California and back to participate in the Libertopia conference, and on that trip was when we had the Airbit's wallet, and it totally changed the game. And then the third trip, we flew out to New Hampshire on a ticket bought with Bitcoin through Cheap Air, one of our sponsors, and we drove the Bitcoin bus back. And by then, we had used a tool called WageCan, which is a debit card that you can load with Bitcoin and then use anywhere that a MasterCard's accepted. So that enabled us to basically fill in the gaps that existed in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So from the onset, our goal was to have fun, to travel with our family, and while doing that, to educate people about Bitcoin, but also put the Bitcoin ecosystem to the test in the realm of travel and leisure and food and entertainment services, and see what tools are needed in order for that to be more seamless for those who might want to travel on Bitcoin or use Bitcoin and not get stranded. So Kat and I were willing to have the ups and downs and the highs and lows, so hopefully people that are new to Bitcoin don't have any major problems in the future and end up being turned off of Bitcoin. And I think that we were able to uncover a lot and work with a lot of cool businesses and stuff.
Do you think after those trips that, like for your next trip, do you feel like now there's like the atmosphere is more favorable towards Bitcoin? Like you've got WageCan and all these different tools. Is it seamless now?
No, it's still not seamless. You can travel with Cheap Air. You can book your hotels with Cheap Air, and you could do flights. So that cuts off a huge chunk. If you get yourself a WageCan debit card, you can pay for gas with that debit card. There was a service before on our first trip that we used called Coin Fueled. They were in beta mode, and I don't think they ever got out of beta mode because they're not around anymore. But there's still a need for that service. But no, it's not totally seamless. The existing institutions still have some kinks to work out. Like we got stranded without a hotel until like 3 a.m. on the trip up to New Hampshire the first time because Coinbase, which services Expedia.com that also accepts Bitcoin, their server was down at a time when we were trying to wait. We were waiting the last minute to book our hotel, and we weren't able to get it, but we had sent them the money, and we hadn't re-upped on some of our Bitcoin. So it was a pretty bad experience, but we were able to work with Expedia and talk to them, and one of their executives called us a couple days later because Kat penned an article for Bitcoin Magazine about our nightmarish experience using Expedia with Bitcoin. And some people were like, you shouldn't say that, it makes Bitcoin look bad, you know. But it's like creative destruction. We were being the test cases so Expedia could clean up their system a little bit. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's still a lot more businesses that ought to accept Bitcoin. Like taxi services makes it difficult. So I don't know if there's like a national taxi chain, maybe like Checker Cab or Yellow Cab. If someone were to encourage them to take Bitcoin, or if Gift or eGifter were to have some sort of taxi gift cards they could sell, that would be a big one. But the more people that do it and talk about it, the more seamless it becomes. But it's definitely trending towards greater adoption and easier tools to help you along the way.
So you mentioned that you sort of hesitated at the beginning with getting into Litecoin and just really looking into cryptocurrencies in general. So for a lot of people, especially in my experience, like you said, you started paying me for the Liberty Beat with Bitcoin, and since then I've bought plane tickets and traveled and done other things and got a better understanding of it as far as application, but still on some level have difficulty explaining the blockchain technology to people. And I know that there are some who they don't want to use a product until they can completely understand the ins and outs of it, and sometimes Bitcoin escapes easy explanation for a lot of people, so because of that they're weary of it and they stay away from it because they don't fully understand it.
What's happened to me.
What advice would you have to those people though, as far as, you know, resources on getting to know Bitcoin better, or just as far as, should they wait? Should they just dive in and start using it because it's worth it for what it is, whether or not you understand it?
I like to refer people to weusecoins.com, which is a pretty slick website that has some nice, simple, short, and sweet YouTube videos. And they have some on how the inner mechanics of Bitcoin work. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have to understand the inner mechanics. Like, people use dollars and Visa cards every day, and they don't know exactly what happens on the back end of those transactions. It's probably more complicated than what happens with the blockchain. But the best thing you could do is just dive right in, because you have nothing to lose. It's free to set up a wallet. You could pull out your smartphone right now and search for Airbits with a Z on an iPhone or Android and download a wallet completely free of charge. You can generate unlimited Bitcoin accounts and addresses within that wallet. And for people that are encouraging Bitcoin adoption, and for Bitcoin activists, one of the best things that you could do with your friends is to walk them through setting up the wallet. Make sure they always write down their password in an extra place. And then give them like $1 worth of Bitcoin. That's pretty cool. It just went up 35% this past month. So if somebody has $1 worth of Bitcoin and they see that now all of a sudden their dollar's worth like $1.35, right? That's pretty cool and exciting. And I think that once they can use that Bitcoin, that's really when you see the utility and the magic of Bitcoin. It's not until you use it. So there's a lot of people that are holding on to it as an investment. I would strongly encourage them to start using it to help grow the value, utility, and the Bitcoin ecosystem, and to reward those that are early adopters and merchants that are accepting Bitcoin well ahead of the curve. But there's really no reason to be standoffish. I don't think there's a grand conspiracy or that it's a negative tool. It certainly can be used for unethical ends, but so can every other currency. And I think that once you see how easy it is to use, even the act of sitting down with someone and sending them Bitcoin and then them seeing immediately the Bitcoin show up in their account is pretty inspiring, and helps the people understand how it works. So yeah, I would say just dive in, get yourself $5 or $10 worth of Bitcoin and experiment with it, play with it, go use it at a restaurant. It's fun.
Awesome. So let's switch gears here for a few minutes. Now, we talked about Bitcoin, and that's obviously a big part of that is economic freedom. And, in my understanding and really my strategy is we have to understand the mechanics of the political system that we're opposing in order to build something better, so we don't make the same mistakes. And also we understand the failures and the control behind the current economic system and ways out of that, such as Bitcoin and others. Mm-hmm. But the more I've heard you talk about freedom cells, to me, I feel like that is going to be a valuable component towards organizing on community level and really with any type of project. I definitely have some specific ideas that I think it could be applied, but I just want to get more into that and hear your take on how you were first introduced to this idea of octalogs or freedom cells, and what exactly is this idea?
So I did political activism for so long with very little fruits, and the victories that we did have were really empty victories in that we weren't more free. We mainly just prevented the further expansion of government. So that's not less government and more freedom. It's less government than there would be had you done nothing. And that kind of seemed like it was full of fail for me, especially since it forces you, if you're a political activist, it dictates your destiny in essence. If you spend so much of your free time doing political activism, and that political activism is driven by that which you oppose, then your opponent is dictating your path. And like you see SOPA, everyone's like, oh man, we got to change our Facebook profile, we're going to call our congressman. It's like, yeah, SOPA's defeated. And then it's like, oh shit, now we got to battle CISPA. And it's like, oh man, I better send some money to this organization and call this dude and write this article. It's like, man. And then at the end of the day, the Constitution is irrelevant. It gets violated. The laws don't matter. The political class doesn't follow them. And if they break them, often they have sovereign immunity. So at the end of the day, just like, it's not legal for the NSA to view your emails, but they do it anyway. It doesn't matter. It matters on the surface, and it helps to inform public opinion of things. But we all have limited time and energy, so I chose to expend my energy in the most effective and efficient way possible. And I started exploring solutions and answers to the question of, if we accept the fact that there's a tyrannical, despotic super government that has all these corporate fascist arms and tentacles, and they're doing all sorts of evil, nasty stuff, and they're not going to voluntarily give up their power. And if we accept the fact that politics often is futile, what do we do to find freedom in our life, or if not in our life, hopefully in the few generations down the line? What can we do now to shield ourselves from this tyranny, and better yet, to build alternatives that can take its place once it crumbles of its own accord, most likely? What kind of institutions can we build that will give us not only freedom, because anybody could stop renewing their driver's license, don't pay their taxes, don't show up when you get a ticket to your summons, and you're free to do that. Most instances of tyranny are voluntarily entered into. I try to not involve myself with any government institution until I've been threatened with violence or coercion. And then I'm like, all right, fine, I'll go to your damn courtroom, but it's going to be fun. So in most instances, it's totally voluntary, and people make the choice because they're afraid, which is totally understandable. I'm afraid. So what can we do to not only make that choice to opt out of tyrannical institutions that we find unethical or that don't have any value to us? What can we do to not only have freedom but also have peace and peace of mind? Not always looking at behind our shoulder because we don't have registration on our school bus, or our inspection sticker and registration are expired on the car, or whatever. People probably have heart attacks if they're doing stuff with the IRS, and then they get an IRS letter, like, what can we do? CPS is something that a lot of people are having to worry about just for living differently. So what can we do to not only have the freedom but also have peace? And I came to the conclusion that there's strength in numbers. And if we can have a critical mass of people that are willing to stand up for one another and stand together in defense of themselves from private criminals and public criminals alike, perhaps when we have a sufficient number of people willing to do that, we can effectively assert our sovereignty and make it clear that we no longer wish to participate in those institutions we find unethical, and we're going to keep to ourselves. And you're going to respect that, because if you don't, we're going to make it difficult for you. And then you kind of just have to step in the shoes of the bureaucrats and politicians and the enforcers, and what can we do in order to make it the cost-benefit analysis fall on the end of leaving us alone. That doesn't necessarily have to involve violence. I would rather it involve creative means of peaceful non-compliance and civil disobedience, and at the end of the day, just people rallying behind one another, whether it's human chains or camping out in front of the jail or just making it a living hell for the man to mess with your people. I think if we start exploring these types of ideas and what types of technologies and tools and institutions can we utilize in order to make this more achievable. Bitcoin's a perfect tool for encrypted communication, for keeping records and accounts of property, and for exchanging value. What a wonderful tool. Owning a firearm is a wonderful tool towards this end, in defense of yourself and your family and your community, knowing how to use it safely and proficiently. Growing your own food and opting out of centralized food grids, doing naturopath and not relying on the Western medical industrial complex. All of these things can make it more likely that you, your family, and your community will be able to thrive in a stateless social organization. And so at the base of that is what I call the freedom cell, what Bob Podolsky calls the octalog, what Stuart Rhodes pushed people to form small county groups that were decentralized and numbering in a small number. It's an idea that's been mentioned before. The left anarchists call them affinity groups that have a single purpose. I call them freedom cells, and it's basically a small group of people committed to mutual aid and mutual defense.
So what is the, I know that there's some research behind the numbers with freedom cells, because it's 8 to 10 to 12 people is kind of ideal in that range. And where does the research come from that, and what are the benefits of having that amount of people?
So I was starting to think about this idea of organizing small groups that then organize into larger groups that then organize into larger groups. And it doesn't have to be hierarchical. It can be completely horizontal. There can just be compacts amongst the groups, and they can utilize strength in numbers. And I was thinking about these ideas, and then I went to this conference called Agorist in Minnesota, and this guy named Nick Ludwig was into small groups, and they had like Ron Paul meetups that they would split into 2 meetups. When they reached like 10 or 15 people or 20 people, they would split them into 2. And then I came back from that trip and heard Stuart Rhodes was organizing these local response teams, and I was like, man, I keep hearing this idea. I need to do something with it. And then I went to Libertopia in California and was exposed to Bob Podolsky, and he's somebody that's really taken this idea of small groups as an alternative to hierarchical governments and social institutions, really taking it seriously. And him and this other older gentleman who's passed since, his name is John David Garcia, they did research for decades to explore the optimal, most effective, most creative types of organization, and they found in their research that small groups of 8 would allow for the most efficiency and creativity. And anytime you go above 8 or below 8, whether it's 7 or 9, you start to lose a little bit of creativity, but very nominal. But when you have 6 people, or when you have 10 or 12 or 15 people, it starts to be more significant, less creativity, more difficulty in furthering a common goal. And so he likes this number 8. I just said 8 to 12 because whatever. I mean, it could be whatever. The number is irrelevant as long as it's happening. But I've found that once you reach a certain number of people, it's harder to have a personal connection. It's harder to keep people in check when they get unruly because they kind of blend in with the other unruly a-holes. But I think the idea of these small groups, it can be effective because people are more personal and everyone can be more involved with one another, as involved as the individual would prefer. And you can have contracts and agreements and stuff like that. But really, Bob Podolsky, who wrote this book, Flourish, Alternatives to Hierarchical Government, something like that, he lays out all the research, and then before him, John David Garcia breaks it down into a science. And they found that the number 8 is optimal, and also an equal ratio of men and women. Nice. Which is hard in the liberty movement sometimes.
There does seem to be a deficiency or a lower amount of women, but I think that's a myth that's being dispelled. The more, well, I don't know. I've found in my experience there's a lot of awake and aware females out there, whether or not they necessarily come to the message in the same way or care about reading all the philosophy books, that they still are interested in finding ways to organize, which is why this idea is really exciting to me, because I feel like from the really simple basic to organizing, I've heard you talk about, okay, this month our Freedom Cell could decide, let's all get 3 months worth of food, backup food. Yeah. Simple ideas like that, to getting to the point where you have your 8 Freedom Cell willing to come not only cop watch and videotape if in the defense of somebody being assaulted by a police officer, but my eventual goal that I would like to see this move towards is, several Freedom Cells in different areas of town. Like I've started to pitch this idea in Houston at the Houston Freethinkers meeting. I've already got 8 people within that group who are interested to go further with this, but we're 8 people spread out throughout the city of Houston. So we're going to start from there, and then the idea is, what I've started to realize, not only with this, but just in general, is that we need to propagate our message. People need to know that good ideas work, like you're doing with Bitcoin. So if we're organizing 8 people and I'm learning all these skills and having all these awesome experiences through this Freedom Cell, we need to turn around then and through social media and through our conversations with our friends, tell them how much we're learning, how effective this type of organization is, and how they should try it out. Yeah. And then have those 8 people that are scattered throughout Houston or Austin or wherever start their own Freedom Cells, and then it grows and it grows. But I would really like to see it get to the point where an officer comes into a community and he shoots somebody or he's trying to assault somebody, and people actively, peacefully, non-violently, de-escalate that situation. I don't know how things would play out, once they happen, but I imagine if the organizational structure was there and the practice and the right mentality was there, we could disarm an officer, remove their badge, let known that HPD, you're no longer welcome in our community. You just came in and assaulted our brother, our sister, you just killed so-and-so, you are not welcome to this community. And I don't really see the police taking arms and killing 8 people who surround them peacefully and form human chains, like, please leave our community now. And who knows what those situations will play out. Like this is sort of, I think a little bit further down the lines. And in the New Libertarian Manifesto, Konkin talks about these various stages of, that we're going from statism to freedom. And I feel like that's probably further down the line as freedom cells grow. Right now, it's a really interesting, intriguing idea to me because it just seems like a positive way to, I mean, we've been pitching the idea like this. Within the 8 people, okay, this month we're all going to learn as much as we can about aquaponics. And maybe you two take this specific angle, you two take this specific angle, and we all come back and we teach each other, you know, and just different things like that. Finding ways that within that 8-person structure to make decisions that are non-hierarchical and can lead to more freedom, and I think just make learning and interacting more of an enjoyable experience. But how do you see this evolving, or these type of ideas? Like, do you think that people will gravitate? Because, you know, it seems like most people are thinking we have global problems, we have to think globally. You know, when I talk to people about small communities, sometimes they're skeptical. They're like, you know, you're only thinking on this small scale level, but what about all these bigger problems and institutions? But ultimately, I think that, you know, once we start on the local level, both internal within ourselves and within our communities, we can move towards, okay, we can still have a global world that is localized. But what are your thoughts on where freedom cells could go?
Yeah, if you just lead by example, it permeates outward. But our first goals with our freedom cell that we had, which crumbled due to, I guess, a lack of communication at the end of the day, which is cool because Bob Podolsky's octalog concept, which is like dialogue, except there's 8 communicating with one another. He does this thing called soul bonding, where it's like self-reflection and there's some psychology involved. And I think that could have likely prevented a lot of discord that we experienced within our freedom cell, because members would have felt more comfortable communicating with one another. But our first set of goals there were 4 goals that we were all going to try to attain within 3 months, and that was to have 3 months of food stored, each member of the group, and everyone could gather their resources and get discount and buy bulk. It was to make sure every single person in the group had a firearm and knew how to use it safely and proficiently, to make sure everyone had an encrypted and off-the-grid means of communicating with one another, and then finally to make sure everyone had a bug-out plan, whether it was a collective place to go or whether it was separate. Everyone just had it and was able to work together to get there. And we started to achieve the goal slowly but surely, but then we had some problems. But I do think that it's important to hold our ultimate goal as something to be achieved and to talk about it. And even though the act of resistance when an officer comes into your community seems like a distant idea that we should contemplate, like we should talk about it, we should train for it, we should hold that up as something to achieve, to attain, to strive for. I think Rothbard said something like, if we don't ever hold our ultimate goal above us, how can we ever hope to achieve it? Because a lot of people are like, well, it's a baby steps with political activism. We're slowly working our way there. But it's like, well, we need to talk about where we need to get to. And in fact, better yet, let's go ahead and get there now. So I saw your post recently on Facebook about we should reach a position where we can disarm the police and we can take their badge off and run them out of our community. And I liked it. I think literally. And and I always am so elated when I see videos of just that happening. However, it usually plays out, except there was one with a angry black mother in New York that managed to peacefully, she pulled away, but I wouldn't call that violence, save her young daughter from being harassed by this cop and taken away. But there's other ones, like there was one in Florida recently and another one during some of the Black Lives Matter protests, where somebody's getting arrested and somebody just ran up and kicked the cop, knocked him over. And of course the cops have numbers, which is why it's important that there's strength in numbers. So if this plays out, if they can get to their radio, surely they're going to radio people in that are going to come guns a-blazing. But at the end of the day, there's something written in the New Hampshire Bill of Rights, and it says the doctrine of, the doctrine of compliance is slavish and should be avoided, something along those lines. And you got to think about it, like put yourself in that position, and you don't have to verbalize it, but think about the scenario playing out where there was a video that I saw in California where a cop drowned a guy. They had him on the floor, handcuffed behind his back. He asked for water, and the cop got a water hose and poured it on his face to the point where he drowned. So, think about that situation. Are you going to sit there and watch it with the video camera? or are you going to possibly save somebody's life at the risk of losing your own? And when you're in an individual scenario, it's much more of a difficult question when you're alone, or when when you are unsure if anyone else is going to jump in and help you. Because at the end of the day, you try to stop a cop from harming a peaceful person, and you better be stronger than him, you better be quick, you better hope that he doesn't pull his firearm or his taser out, and you better hope that his buddies come. But imagine if you had a predetermined understanding with a group of 8 people, or with 8 groups of 8 people, that most of them, a good chunk of them, are present at a protest, and you knew that all 8 of those people are going to get your back, and they're going to stop the injustice too. Because you guys talked about it, and you've been talking about it, and you've been planning for it, and you've been training and doing peaceful noncompliance. And all 8 of you look at each other and immediately swarm, disarm the officer, take his badge away. Maybe you even call the police and they're like, hey, you have a rogue officer here, you need to come pick him up, we're peaceful people. Imagine how different that would be. And then it's all, I'm all for peaceful noncompliance, but I'm also all for self-preservation, and it's scary to talk about, but there's going to come a point where the point is already here. It's an objective ethical position, in my opinion, that if someone is doing something unethical and they're harming someone, especially to the point of taking their life, you can, and in many instances you ought to use violence in defense of that person. And just because someone has a badge doesn't mean that they should have a pass. But in practical, that's the way things ought to be. That's not the way things are, because in practical circumstances, as I said before, we should learn to defend ourselves from private and public criminals alike, but there's a big difference between defending yourself from public and private criminals, and the difference is when you defend yourself from a private criminal, you're held up as a hero, and nobody thinks much of it, but when you defend yourself from a public criminal, whether it's a law enforcement officer or a bureaucrat, you often end up dead or a felon, and in many instances the propaganda machine and the media are able to paint you as the bad guy and the extremist. But it's something that should be talked about, it's something that should be contemplated, and certainly the existence of small groups of 8 that have predetermined understandings and plans and training would make that safer and more likely that justice would be served and innocence wouldn't be harmed.
Absolutely. The video you're talking about with the angry black woman, and that's actually why I made that Facebook post, because I'd seen a number of those, and this is a situation that I've played it over in my head over and over, that it's not about trying to be macho or be the hero, but I just imagine seeing somebody murdered right in front of me or beaten. I can't stand there and keep filming, you know what I mean? But I don't want to just be the guy that rushes and gets shot, but that's what would happen. Unless, as you were just saying, we had some type of organization, some type of practice, and you knew whatever your plan may be. And I think the time is here that this is definitely a worthy conversation. So that's kind of sort of one of the ways that I think freedom cells could be applied, but obviously there's so many other applications, as you mentioned, from everybody getting on the same page with encryption, with food, with bug out bags, with just preparation in general for all type of emergency situations. And I think it's great. You mentioned I think you said soul bonding, or just that type of aspect that is really going to bring our community closer together, because obviously my particular message along with the anarchist ideals is about looking within ourselves. And if we have 8 people, my goal would be that each of those 8 people is also doing their own personal work. As much as they're willing to do comfortably with everybody in that circle, we open up to each other. We really form tight-knit bonds so that you do feel inclined to help these other individuals out and want to help them out, and can actually get that structure put in place. So I'm excited to really just to see what I can do to help propagate those ideas in Houston and other areas. I'm not sure when this video and audio will be posted, but this Friday, July 17th, John and Kat will be in Houston. We're going to be speaking at the Last Organic Outpost, which is a big community farm that I'm a part of. And we're going to be talking about peaceful parenting, Bitcoin, freedom cells, lots of interesting ideas. So if you're around, if you happen to check it out, do so. If not, I'm sure there'll be a video afterwards. Before we go, John, I want to give you a second to plug all of the various projects that you're involved in, whatever is most close to your heart right now, and anything else you got to say.
Well, my wife and I just took over Brave New Books, bravenewbookstore.com, 1904 Guadalupe Street. Give us a call at 512-480-2503. Or come down and see us weekdays and weekends from 12 to 9 p.m. in Austin, Texas. So that's really occupying a significant portion of our time, and people that are in Central Texas should come visit us and check it out, and check out the great events at bravenewbookstore.com. We're going to be launching an online store soon as well. And I'm doing my podcast, Sovereign BTC. You can find it on letstalkbitcoin.com, Let's Talk Bitcoin Network. And we actually just started doing a variety show. We did 1 week a couple weeks ago, and we're going to do it again this Sunday live at Brave New Books from 6 to 8. And there's going to be musical acts and comedy and poetry and news and freedom and all sorts of good things. All things that are good. So come on down and visit us at Brave New Books. And if you haven't yet, get yourself some Bitcoin.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us today, John. And thank you guys for checking out this video or audio, whatever you're tuned in on. Be sure to follow our work on the Conscious Resistance Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at The Conscious RN. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at DBrosLiveFree.
At DBrosLiveFree!
And subscribe to YouTube, Twitter, all that good stuff. And if you'd like exclusive content, subscribe to the Patreon account, patreon.com/Derrick Broze. You get interviews like this, and all the videos that I do, I put them out a couple days ahead of time for those who want to support for as little as $1 a month. And that is much appreciated. Thank you guys for listening. Until next time, if you can hear this, you are the resistance. Peace.